So, a while ago it was suggested to me that I should make a totally unbiased and truthful review of Google Stadia from the perspective of an average person. The person who suggested this was a friend of mine who thought that reviewers had been unfairly positive towards the product. So I decided to go ahead and I started the 2-month free trial of Google Stadia, and now I present to you my completely factual and unbiased review of Google Stadia from the perspective of an average user. So with the intention of seeing what Google Stadia was really like, I decided I simply had to give it a go. Stadia has been a bit of a personal curiosity of mine for a while, as I've seen many people say it's amazing, whereas other people say it's currently unusable junk. So with that in mind, I went ahead and went over to Google Stadia's website using my Linux gaming PC. In theory, my internet should be more than up for Stadia, and the web browser I was using at that time, Vivaldi, was Chromium based, so in theory everything should work, and indeed it did. Google Stadia let me right in just as if I was using Google Chrome, and once I went onto the site I signed up and started my free trial, and I was immediately sent to the Google Stadia homepage, which in my opinion does look nice enough. It's fairly easy to navigate and it shows you all of the games you can play with your subscription as well as the ones you can pay extra for. Now this is where my first complaint with Stadia comes in. The game selection is nowhere near big enough for the price of admission. To get access to Stadia you're charged £9 a month, and for that price you get a handful of free games. They all seem to be fairly high quality, but there aren't nearly enough games, and certainly aren't enough AAA games to justify the price. Most of the titles are indie games that most people can probably run on their PC anyway. There are a few big names such as Grid, but that's about it. Actually buying those AAA games on Stadia is a very mixed bag too, because you have to buy them separately from the Stadia subscription. The catalogue is quite impressive given how new Stadia is, and some of the games are actually reasonably priced, but other games are vastly more expensive than on a traditional console, completely unreasonably so. So all in all, I would say the experience of buying games on Stadia is nothing that will make you want to ditch your console, to say the least. But with all of that said, I had a look at what games you get for free with Stadia Pro and decided to try and play a bit of Superhot. Everything seemed to work, my keyboard and mouse was detected and worked absolutely fine, but my initial experience with Stadia was still truly awful. The quality was awful, the game lagged and stuck to the point of being unplayable, and then after a few minutes the game just crashed. And I thought at that point my experience with Stadia was over and I was going to be making a review talking about how awful it is. However, I ended up persevering and I tried to launch Superhot again, and this time it worked amazingly, as compared with my previous experiences with cloud gaming anyway. The first thing that was immediately obvious is the quality is a lot lower than what you'd experience with running a game locally on a more traditional console or PC. The streaming artifacts were quite obvious and the game generally looked worse than running locally, but perhaps that's to be expected to some extent. However, what surprised me is that the latency was actually very low, almost unnoticeable in a game like Superhot. Now don't get me wrong, the latency is too high for any professional gamers and I still think it's borderline noticeable to most people, but to the casual gamer maybe that doesn't matter all that much. So all in all, I found Superhot to be playable on Stadia, if a less than ideal experience. And although this isn't a review of Superhot, I can say that Superhot is great fun and it'll definitely be something you'll want to try if you do get Google Stadia. However, the game can run even on a low-end PC, so maybe there isn't much point having it here on Stadia for streaming, but it's here, it's good fun, and if you get Stadia, you ought to try it. Next, I decided to try something a little bit different. I connected my PS4 controller to my PC and went ahead and launched Grid. As with before, the game worked very well and Stadia instantly recognized my PS4 controller and it worked with very little latency as with before. Stadia even supports controller vibrations, which I found to be quite impressive. As for Grid itself, I found it to be a far better demonstration of what's possible with cloud gaming. The visuals on Grid are very impressive and certainly not something you could do without a console or a gaming PC, although the quality reduction caused by streaming certainly ruined Grid's visuals a bit, but despite that it's still very impressive, although once again not worth the price of admission. And to finish off with, I decided to try another game, one that isn't even out on the PC yet, and that game is Panzer Dragoon Remastered. Now sadly, I found the experience with Panzer Dragoon to be less than ideal. Even the slightest bit of input lag introduced by Stadia messes with a game like Panzer Dragoon, which needs fast reaction times. As well as that, I experienced a lot of sort of weird behaviour from my controller that made the game somewhat difficult to play. However, I'd probably still say that wasn't enough to totally ruin my experience of Panzer Dragoon Remastered, but sadly, once again, it was nowhere near worth the price of admission, and I think that's true of Stadia generally. I had fun without a doubt, but in every instance I can think of where Stadia might be useful, there's just another solution that's better and actually worth the price, whereas Stadia just isn't worth the price. So really I have to ask, who is Stadia for? Possibly for casual gamers who want a simple and easy gaming experience and who aren't really bothered with the downsides of Stadia, and those who are willing to cough up £9 a month for what is, at absolute best, just a decent service. But to be honest, at that point you're probably just better off buying a traditional console, as you're going to have a much better experience. Or to be honest, I think at this point even your smartphone has a much stronger library of games and will provide a better experience than Stadia at the moment. So in conclusion, I find that Stadia is alright, but it's nowhere near as good as a traditional console yet. The game selection just isn't there yet, and the experience of using Stadia ranges from pretty good to very subpar. So what I would say in conclusion is this: if Stadia sounds like something that's really appealing to you, maybe look into getting it for the games you can play for free with the subscription. But I wouldn't personally recommend actually buying games on Stadia, and in fact I would probably just recommend, buying a console, buying a gaming PC, or even just playing games on your phone if you're a casual gamer. So it seems the review is never quite over, because recently, and I do mean a few days ago after I'd finished recording, Google added experimental support for Stadia on all Android smartphones. So I went ahead and downloaded Stadia onto my phone, and honestly I have only good things to say about it. The touchscreen controls actually work reasonably well, at least for Panzer Dragoon Remastered, and the screen is so small that the low quality and high latency is barely noticeable, so it really does feel like I'm just playing on a handheld console. You can even connect a controller if you want, so maybe that means that Stadia could be useful for people who exclusively own smartphones but want to start gaming, which that could be quite an interesting market to target. And those are my thoughts on Google Stadia. I hope you enjoyed listening to them. If you're new to the channel, consider subscribing. If you want to support the channel and join a fantastic open source alternative to YouTube, follow the link in the description to join LBRY. If you're already on LBRY, consider leaving a tip, as it really helps the show out. And with that said, I thank you for watching, and I will see you in the next video.